We've all said it at some point. Gaming is just getting worse. Disappointing releases, buggy games sold at a full price that feel more like a beta, content clearly cut from the main game sold as DLC. Then we have the blatant asset flips or the Kickstarter scams. But then a game like Baldur's Gate 3 comes along, or Elden Ring, or Expedition 33, and many other big hits. Suddenly, everything feels okay again. We convince ourselves that these hits prove the industry is healthy, and that any problems we see are just isolated incidents. But what if they're not? For a while, I had a nagging feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. Then by chance, I discovered a concept that seemed to perfectly explain my discomfort: Enshittification. Enshittification is the systematic degradation of a product or service with a precise purpose to squeeze as much value, meaning money, as possible from customers and transfer it to shareholders. This got me thinking, is this what's happening to the gaming industry? And if so, is it already too late? Can we stop it? Or even reverse it? In this video, I'm going to explore these questions. We'll break down the exact definition of enshittification and look at a textbook example of how it works. Then I'll introduce a framework we can use to evaluate if this process is underway in the gaming world. We will look at specific telltale signs that something is indeed happening. And finally, I'll humbly suggest some ways we, as gamers, can counter this process or stop it altogether. Because, yes, spoiler alert, enshittification is definitely underway. But the game isn't over yet. We can still beat this boss, even if we might be at our last healing potion with less than half of our health bar left. Let's start with the definition of enshittification. The term was first coined by Canadian writer Cory Doctorow in a blog post published in November 2022 titled Social Quitting. That post was later republished in Locus magazine and Wired, and the word quickly gained traction, so much so that it's now officially recognized in Merriam-Webster and Dictionary.com. What does it actually mean? Enshittification describes a specific and depressingly familiar pattern of decline for a product or service. You've likely seen it play out on many of the online platforms you use every day. It works in three distinct phases. Phase 1. Attract the users. Initially, the platform offers high-quality services and features to attract a loyal user base. The experience is great, and you feel like you're getting a lot of value. Phase 2. Squeeze the users. Once the user base is locked in, the platform begins degrading the user experience. The goal here is to shift value to the real customers, advertisers, vendors, and business partners. Phase 3. Squeeze the customers. Finally, once the business clients are also locked into the platform, the company degrades their experience as well, all to maximize profit for shareholders. The shift is rarely sudden, but it's steady and relentless. We've seen this with Facebook, Google Search, Amazon, and Twitter, or X. Think about it. Do you even remember when they were good? These platforms started by offering real value, connection, discovery, and convenience. Now, many of them feel less like helpful tools and more like bloated marketplaces, constantly pushing what they want you to see instead of helping you find what you actually need. In his original blog post, Cory Doctorow used Facebook as the textbook example of this process. Let's walk through it. Initially, Facebook was a real improvement over MySpace. It had a cleaner interface, more features, and, most importantly, a promise that it wouldn't spy on you for advertisers. As ridiculous as that sounds today, at the time it was one of the platform's biggest selling points. Once Facebook successfully poached millions of users from MySpace, it had what every platform dreams of, a captive audience. And that's when the real transformation began. The promise of privacy? Gone. Facebook started tracking user behavior and sending that data to advertisers, media companies, and publishers. In this second phase, these businesses got an amazing deal. Their content could reach a massive audience for a fraction of the cost of traditional advertising. But the users paid the price, watching their timelines fill up with irrelevant posts, clickbait, and ads. When those business clients became dependent on Facebook's traffic, it was time for the final twist of the knife. Facebook began throttling traffic to outside links. If a publisher posted a link to their website, it got buried by the algorithm. The platform instead prioritized native content, forcing everyone to stay within Facebook's ecosystem. This created a double hostage situation. Users couldn't easily leave due to social lock-in and high switching costs. Publishers and advertisers couldn't leave either because their audiences were locked in. With everyone trapped, Facebook could finally jack up ad prices and force publishers to pay to have their own posts seen. The result? A degraded experience for users, a costly and manipulative system for businesses, and an enormous amount of value extracted from both sides and funneled directly to shareholders. This is Enshittification in action. As of August 2025, Facebook's market cap is estimated around $1.9 trillion. Guess who paid for that? Facebook is not alone. You can trace this same pattern with other platforms like Google Search, Amazon, etc. In his original blog post, Dr. Rowe argues that this process eventually leads to the platform's death, because at some point the pain of staying outweighs the cost of leaving. But that doesn't seem to be happening. Why? Because any viable competitor is either acquired or crushed before it can gain enough traction to be a real threat. So for the user, there is no escape. While Dr. Rowe first applied this idea to social media, the same pattern applies far more broadly. In fact, in a follow-up op-ed in the Financial Times titled "Enshittification is coming for absolutely everything," he expanded the framework to cover all kinds of tech businesses. So let's look at that framework as well, and then use it to explore a more specific question. Is this process happening to the gaming industry as well? According to Dr. Rowe, there are 4 key forces that act as constraints on companies and help resist enshittification. They are competition, regulation, self-help, and workers. The first 2, competition and regulation, are straightforward and apply nearly to every industry. Companies know that if they degrade their products or crank up prices too much, customers might simply take their business elsewhere. Competition acts as a natural check on how far they can push. Similarly, the threat of fines or sanctions from regulators keeps companies in check, as long as the cost of getting caught outweighs the profit from cheating. The other 2, self-help and workers, are specific to the tech sector. Self-help is all about user resistance. Users are clever and often find ways to take back control when platforms try to push exploitative features. The perfect example of this is the creation of ad blockers, which directly counter a platform's attempt to force advertising on its users. Workers are another crucial bulwark. For a long time, the tech industry was defined by a talent shortage. Skilled developers and engineers were in such high demand that they could quit and find a job almost immediately. To retain them, big tech companies transformed their workplaces into a mix of campuses, spas, and amusement parks. These environments were designed to create a sense of mission and make employees feel like they were building something meaningful, not just churning out products to enrich shareholders. This had also an interesting side effect. When an executive tried to push questionable enshittifying changes, it was often the employees themselves who resisted, becoming an internal check on the process. Over time, however, the power of all these constraints has slowly dissipated. One by one, their ability to keep companies off the path of enshittification has eroded. Take competition. While most advanced economies have legal frameworks designed to prevent monopolies, these laws have been increasingly ignored, relaxed, or simply not enforced. The result is that in many industries, especially in tech, we're left with just a handful of giants that dominate everything. These companies have free rein to either acquire potential competitors or drive them out of business with unfair practices like selling products below cost until a rival collapses. And once a company gets big enough, it gains another superpower, the ability to influence politicians. They can pressure lawmakers to rewrite the rules in their favor, either by legalizing previously questionable practices or by ensuring that the fines for breaking the law are so small that they're just written off as the cost of doing business. As for the third constraint, self-help, it's also under attack. Today's tech giants are aggressively weaponizing copyright and IP laws to suppress competition, not just to prevent misuse. The tragic irony is that in their early days, many of these companies used practices that, if attempted today by a startup, would get them sued into oblivion. Just look into how Facebook originally lured users away from MySpace. And finally, there are the workers. When only a handful of tech giants dominate the job market, the old threat of "I'll just go work somewhere else" becomes just a meme. For years, tech workers believed their jobs were temporary, a launchpad on a path to building their own company, and maybe even unseating the current market leader. That dream has largely faded. Today, most tech workers are just hoping they don't get laid off in the next round of restructuring. The sense of agency, the ability to resist, has largely vanished. So now the question becomes, how much of this applies to the gaming industry? Is Enshittification already taking root in gaming, or are there still forces holding it back? First, let's address a key difference. Gaming companies don't operate like the end-to-end platforms we just discussed. They aren't classic middlemen, so they don't create that dual hostage situation between users and business customers. However, that doesn't make them immune to Enshittification. In fact, video games still generate powerful network effects among its users. And in a surprising twist, gamers themselves are often the ones creating these lock-in mechanisms, voluntarily and even enthusiastically. Modern games are increasingly social by design. Many are built around cooperative or competitive play. They offer in-game rewards tied to time investment, rankings, skins, exclusive gear and mounts. They aren't just cosmetic, they represent status, effort, and a sense of belonging. Beyond that, you have the guilds, clans and raiding groups that form to tackle the hardest content. These relationships don't just exist inside the game, they extend outward into a meta layer of community on Discord servers, Reddit threads, YouTube channels, and many more platforms. This is where people celebrate wins, vent frustrations, share tips, and create memes that only the in-group will understand. This dynamic creates a powerful push to stay plugged in, to be in the know, and not miss out. Over time, real friendships form, and in some cases, even more than that. What we're really talking about here are deep lock-in mechanisms rooted in emotional attachment, identity formation, and nostalgia. For many people, their most intense and immersive gaming experiences happen during their early to mid-teens, their formative years. When an emotional game experience coincides with a period of self-discovery or personal growth, it becomes more than just entertainment. It becomes a symbol, a memory capsule. When a company gives a player that kind of experience, it's no longer just a game developer. It becomes a trusted friend. That kind of bond is incredibly hard to break. And it's something game companies actively nurture. And why wouldn't they? It's a smart business move. Nintendo is a fine example. The sprawling world of Mario, with its cast of characters, Luigi, Peach, Bowser, and all the others, has been carefully expanded and reimagined for decades, for a reason. Then add all the brand extension strategies. You see your beloved game character on toys, backpacks, lunchboxes, and cereal boxes. You see them in TV shows, comic books, and movies. Suddenly, it's not just a game you played, it's a world you live in. This creates multiple layers of player lock-in. The more emotionally invested you are, the harder it is to walk away. For some players, these attachments run deep. For others, they may feel more casual, but either way, they translate into very real switching costs. Players indeed lock themselves in, whether emotionally, financially, or socially, and companies help them do it. Sometimes that bond becomes so strong it borders on unhealthy. It can lead to a kind of brand loyalty where players defend poor decisions, tolerate bad practices, or justify disappointing releases, not because they approve of them, but because they feel they are part of something bigger than the product itself. What about the four forces that are supposed to keep companies from enshittifying their products? As we discussed, these forces apply to tech companies, and they absolutely apply to the gaming industry. But let's take a closer look. The first force, competition, is currently being undermined by a massive wave of consolidation across the industry. We're all familiar with the headline deals, Microsoft acquiring ZeniMax, Bethesda, and then Activision Blizzard, Sony buying Insomniac and Bungie. But these are just the most obvious examples. The more insidious trend is a steady stream of partial acquisition and minority investments. The clearest example here is Tencent, which has quietly built a sprawling web of stakes across the industry. Some of the most notable include Riot Games, Epic Games, Larian Studios, From Software, Ubisoft, Grinding Gear Games, and the list goes on. What about regulation? The second force meant to keep companies from degrading their products. Are the authorities actually stepping in, or just watching it all unfold? In Europe, we're starting to see some movement, with clear signs of renewed effort to reinforce antitrust laws, revise outdated frameworks, and expand consumer protections. Japan also seems to be moving in the same direction, with more scrutiny towards consolidation. The United States, however, is a bit of a question mark right now. While the previous administration showed a willingness to scrutinize big tech mergers, the current landscape is murky, and the general feeling is that the US is drifting back into an era of regulatory passivity. And here's the issue: even if future regulations are being drafted, the damage from lack of enforcement may have already been done. This brings us to the third constraint, self-help. It is also under attack through the pernicious use of copyright and IP laws, which have become a tool to maintain dominance and stifle competition. The most notorious recent example is the lawsuit between Nintendo and Pocket Pair, the developers of Palworld. This case is emblematic not just because of its high profile, but because what Nintendo is actually suing over. Gameplay mechanics like throwing a ball to catch a monster or switching between rideable creatures. These are actual mechanics that Nintendo has secured patents for. This lawsuit has pulled back the curtain on a much larger, more troubling issue: the world of gameplay patents. It signals a future where mundane, fundamental mechanics could be locked behind legal fences, ready to be deployed, not to protect from abuse, but to crush emerging competition. In the case of Palworld, the game's real crime might not have been copying Pokémon, but rather delivering the game that Pokémon fans have wanted for years. In that light, Nintendo's reaction feels less about protecting its IP and more like a desperate attempt to cover up years of stagnation. Is it a signal, perhaps, that the Enshittification of the Pokémon franchise is already underway? The last of the four forces that can restrain Enshittification is workers, especially in industries where talent is scarce and mobility is high. For a while that was true in gaming. Developers could move studios or go indie, keeping companies in check. But that balance is eroding, and it's happening fast. Between 2022 and May 2025, the gaming industry lost an estimated 35,000 jobs, and it's not stopping. Just this July, Microsoft announced another 9,000 job cuts, affecting also its gaming division. What's especially galling is the timing. These layoffs are often announced right after companies post strong financial results, making it clear they are not a result of failure, but a strategy to increase shareholder value. This raises an obvious question. Could all these talented laid-off people simply start their own studios and fuel a new wave of innovation? In theory, yes. In practice, not so much. Funding for mid-sized indie projects is drying up. A prime example: Glenn Schofield, the creator of Dead Space and Callisto Protocol, reportedly failed to secure funding for a new project. He was looking for $20 million, but the final offers on the table were only between $2 and $5 million. Smaller, ultra-low-budget indie projects may still survive, but the overall trend is clear. Investors are risk-averse. They want safe bets and established IPs, not risky new ideas. So, is the gaming industry enshittifying? Yes, some of the big players are trying hard to do it, but it's not a done deal. In my opinion, this is still an open game. There's still time to turn things around. The warning signs, however, are impossible to ignore. Let's start with the most obvious. Microtransactions are not so micro anymore. And that wouldn't be so bad if it was the only way a game made money. But it's not. More and more, we're seeing full-priced games that also include a microtransaction shop, a premium battle pass, and a constant nudge to spend money instead of playing the game. To make matters worse, content or features are often cut from the base game only to be sold later as DLC. And let's not forget the infamous pay-for-convenience trend. Some games are made intentionally grindy, so players are pushed to buy XP boosts, resource packs, or cosmetics otherwise locked behind absurdly long grinds. And I'm not even going to touch the mobile gaming space. That's a microtransaction hellscape of its own. But let's not forget another very good one, NFTs. Some developers still haven't let go of that dream. In late 2024, Ubisoft quietly launched an NFT game called Champions Tactics Grimoria Chronicles. Square Enix as well announced the intention of integrating NFTs back in 2023. Good news and bad news on that front though. Square Enix first announced early this year the end of their NFT project Symbiogenesis, but then a few months later they confirmed it was instead coming back on Sony's Sonium blockchain. Did you know Sony had a blockchain project? Well, now you know. Shall we talk about AI? AI has quickly become the wet dream of every gaming CEO. Why? Because it promises to allow them to cut costs by firing hundreds of employees, produce games of questionable quality, but still maintain all the monetization practices mentioned above and sell the product at a premium AAA price. Need more signs? Let's look at some actual corporate statements. In a company report published this year, Ubisoft stated that their monetization offer within premium games makes the player experience more fun by allowing them to personalize their avatars or progress more quickly. However, this is always optional. Translated into current English means we intentionally made the fun parts of the game annoying, but don't worry, you can pay to skip them. Or how about a classic from the then CEO of EA, John Riccitiello, who at a 2011 stockholder meeting suggested that EA should charge Battlefield players $1 per reload. His reasoning? When you're in the middle of a game, you're willing to pay any amount of money to keep playing. This isn't game design, it's value extraction, plain and simple. A mindset that's not just cynical, it's a textbook example of Enshittification. In the middle of this maelstrom, we can't ignore the elephant in the room though, the soaring cost of making AAA games. According to a 2023 report by the UK's Competition and Markets Authority, the average development budget for big console or PC titles in 2018-2019 was between $50 and $150 million. Projections for projects made in 2024-2025 was around $200 million. And for titles like GTA 6, the cost will be well beyond that. And that's just for development. Marketing costs can be as high as $300 million, depending on the franchise. On some level, we can understand why big developers are so desperate to recoup those costs. They need these games to be multi-million copy hits, and they need it fast. To truly drive this analysis home and highlight how Enshittification is not accidental, but engineered, and to give a clear warning about what's to come, let's quickly review a report titled Leveling Up for the New Reality, published in December 2024 by the Boston Consulting Group, a massive and highly influential management consulting firm. The report starts by outlining the gaming industry's current trajectory, projecting that while overall revenues will grow from $221 billion in 2024 to $266 billion by 2028, the annual growth rate will slow down to around 5%. At the same time, the cost growth rate is expected to settle at about 8% per year. You don't need to be a consultant to see the problem. A company cannot sustain itself long term when its costs are growing faster than its revenues. To reverse this trend, the report proposes 9 strategies for gaming companies, which I decided to order from the most benign to the most disturbing. We start with support cross-platform play. Not so bad. The report suggests that cross-platform play will become increasingly common, and this does make a lot of business sense. It's also very likely console exclusives may fade away, with major titles launching on all platforms simultaneously. I think this move is beneficial for everyone, as it means more games will be available to more players. Monetize emerging markets. Emerging markets are a major opportunity, as the percentage of people playing games is rising faster there than in advanced economies. To maximize profits immediately though, the report advises introducing these new players to all forms of monetization from the start. Just to make sure they understand that playing and having fun comes at a significant cost. Catch the nostalgia bug. Expect more remasters, remakes, and reimaginings of classic games and franchises. If anything though, the authors acknowledge that simple cut-and-paste remasters are no longer enough. Developers must leverage modern games engines and technology. But they also propose adding online multiplayer capabilities to older single-player games, heavily implying to have a sort of live service game structure. Because why have only good things in life? Focus on untapped demographics is another one. The report identifies young children and seniors as targets that, by the way, might play together. While this might seem harmless, the text notes that the video gaming age currently begins at around 7 years of age. They want companies to aim at much younger kids, and let's not forget that some games can have quite aggressive monetization structures and gambling-like elements. Not so harmless anymore, is it? Going directly to the consumer, the report suggests a renewed effort to bypass digital storefronts like Steam and go directly to consumers. This is a curious point, given that previous attempts by major companies to force their own launches on players have largely failed. Apparently, bad ideas don't die so easily. Embrace AI and automation for efficiency. Now we're getting to the juicy parts. AI is already used in game development. This isn't news. But BCG recommends going much further. They propose using AI for generating gaming assets, designing levels, and even writing character dialogue, plus also the automation of repetitive tasks like playtesting, quality assurance, and localization. Be ready for a wave of AI-generated games in the near future. Moving on, we have take a nuanced approach to price increases. What does that mean exactly? Simple. Don't raise prices across the board. Instead, segment your audience. Offer a standard base price, but then create multiple higher-priced tiers to capture the willingness to pay of your most dedicated fans. Think deluxe editions, collector's bundles, and all sorts of tiered offerings targeted at locked-in players. And of course, there's the ever-growing lineup of in-game purchases and microtransactions designed to maximize the average revenue per user. In case you were wondering whether microtransactions could get any worse, well, yes, they can and they will. Another good one, develop a subscription strategy, also known as live service games. Yay! A direct quote from the report. The beauty of subscriptions models is their emphasis on recurring revenue. So get ready to bask in the beauty of the next wave of live service games. The worst part, even when these projects fail spectacularly, like Concord or Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, big studios will just keep trying again and again and again. Why? Because they only need to strike gold once, and they still have the cash to keep trying and failing, for now. And finally, the best suggestion comes last. Explore advertising. Yes, it is exactly what you think it is. In-game ads or ad breaks that reward the players for watching them. So generous. And to be clear, we're not talking about mobile games. This is about PC and console games, platforms that traditionally have been ad-free, for now. So yes, this is one version of the future that awaits gamers with open arms. But can we actually do anything about it? I think we can, at least enough to slow down the pace at which these practices take over. Maybe even force a bit of rebalancing, reducing how much value gets siphoned off to shareholders. A great first step is to be honest with ourselves. We need to assess how deeply we're locked into a brand or franchise and try to take a more detached approach. I know that's easier said than done, but we shouldn't be afraid to skip the next sequel, even if we hope this will be the one that finally redeems years of disappointment. Let's be real, sometimes we're not buying a game, we're buying nostalgia. We're trying to go back to a simpler time when we were 11 or 12 years old and felt safe and protected. Growing up sucks, but what can you do? One thing is for sure, microtransactions aren't going anywhere, but we can still be vocal when they're too aggressive or blatantly exploitative. Most importantly, don't get so invested in a game or franchise that you can't walk away even when you know they're robbing you blind. Yes, that might even mean seeing a beloved series shut down if it can't deliver a fair deal for its players. Someone once wrote, "Sometimes the best thing a flower can do for us is to die." Maybe we need just to be as cynical as the executives who desperately want our money. Here's the thing, sometimes companies do walk back on exploitative practices, but only when we push them hard enough. These shouldn't be rare exceptions, they should be the rule. So, vote with your wallet every single time. Then there are broader measures that could help restore the four forces that keep companies from sliding into enshittification. We need to support the indie game scene and smaller studios. This is about fostering real competition to keep the big companies on their toes. As we've discussed, funding for mid-sized indie projects is drying up. One idea is to support non-profit organizations that fund these studios, like the UK Games Fund. Maybe even governments could step in, offering grants to help small studios survive and innovate. Where does the money for that come from? Well, perhaps from the taxes that large companies should be paying. And this brings in the hot topic of making big corporations pay their taxes by closing the loopholes that let them avoid their financial responsibilities. It's also time for a serious look at antitrust enforcement. We need to stop pretending that endless acquisitions and industry consolidation benefit consumers. Furthermore, IP and copyright laws need to be scrutinized, especially how companies weaponize them to stifle innovation. We might consider limiting what companies are allowed to patent, particularly when it comes to generic gameplay mechanics that should be available for everyone to build upon. We also need to talk about unionization. As we've seen, workers are the strongest internal check against enshittification, but they need power. We are seeing some promising signs here, with successful unionization efforts at Bethesda Game Studios, Activision, Blizzard, and CD Projekt Red. These are early steps, but they matter. If workers gain a stronger voice, the long-term health of the industry stands a much better chance. So, in the end, what I'm saying is this: resist, resist, resist. You can do this both in small and big ways. You can choose not to buy the next installment in a franchise that's clearly running on fumes. You can be vocal on official forums, but remember to stay polite, factual, and calm. You can also go further. You can help organize citizen initiatives that pressure legislators to revise laws that currently favor shareholders at the expense of players, or anything in between really. What matters is the mindset. We do have the power to push back and reclaim some of the value that's been so shamelessly siphoned away from us. So, as you've seen, enshittification is a complex phenomenon. Each of the forces behind it, from locked-in consumers and weakened competition to regulatory gaps, etc., could easily be the topic of its own in-depth video. Also, closely related to this, could be interesting exploring if we really need AAA games or AAA studios. Maybe I will do it. Let me know in the comments. Before I close though, I want to address one final point. You may have noticed I haven't mentioned one key industry player, one that, on paper, has all the traits of a company ripe for enshittification: Steam. As a platform, Steam fits the textbook example of a middleman company that could easily abuse its position. And yet, it hasn't really gone down that path. In fact, more often than not, Steam has acted in ways that seem aligned with gamers' interests. This brings up an interesting question. Is it because Valve is privately owned? Is it because they're free from the relentless pressure of quarterly earnings and the demands of shareholders? It's definitely something to think about. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please consider to like and subscribe. That would really help. my channel. And see you in the next video. Bye bye.